Hello and welcome to Kalil Ranks Cowboy Bebop episodes. As it says on the thingamabobber, pretty much every episode after the first 3 is real good. So just because your favorite episode, let's say, was ranked at number 20, it doesn't mean I think it's a bad episode, it just means I think there's 19 that are somehow better. Cowboy Bebop is a show I've watched about 4 times I think now. Pretty much every time I watch it, I enjoy it more, I get more out of it, it's a certified classic. So really, aside from the first 3, which I think are kind of duds, the show's fantastic, and this could have gone any way. This is all subjective, I just happen to like some more than others. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, we're blasting off with number 26, Session 15, My Funny Valentine. In my opinion, the weakest episode of Cowboy Bebop is My Funny Valentine. Which, aside from being the worst name of a session in the whole series, My Funny Valentine also is just not very inspired. I think that the origin story of Faye itself is interesting, but the love angle that's in this episode specifically doesn't really work for me. There's parts of it where Faye is comparing herself to a sleeping beauty, and that feels pretty bland. The doctor character feels over-the-top evil, but not in a way that I find entertaining, just kind of eh. And as I even illustrated there in the top right image, there's a lot of moments where it just feels a little weirdly sexual, and trust me, with Faye, I get it, sexuality is the thing with her character, but in the condition of her waking up from a coma and losing her entire life, I just don't find it particularly that effective. I do like the shot of Ein there with the eyebrows, though, that's pretty cute. Number 25 is Session 21, Boogie Woogie Feng Shui. I run another channel with a friend of mine who goes by the name The Unplugged Professor, and his least favorite episode in the whole series is Boogie Woogie Feng Shui. I'm a little more merciful in that I gave it the number 2 worst spot, not the number 1, but I have to agree with him, it's not really that strong of an episode. The writers here do a lot of tell, don't show sort of strategies, where we're told the relationship between Jet and his former friend, and we're told the daughter's relationship with her father, but I don't necessarily feel like I was invested in the characters or really knew much about it to begin with. Not with a sense of mystery, just a sense of things kept happening and we were just along for the ride. Really low stakes and really low tension for a Cowboy Bebop episode. A lot of episodes either have very high personal stakes for the characters involved, or we have an investment through, if they don't succeed, the Bebop crew could possibly indirectly allow some horrible catastrophe to let loose, or a terrible criminal will get away with something. This episode doesn't have that. The only character who really does have high stakes in this episode is the daughter, but we really don't know her, and she's a really bland personality. No disrespect to the voice actor, but the English VA is also not very well suited, which is rare because this show has an amazing voice cast. And then there's also all the weird stuff in here where it keeps insinuating that Jet is in a relationship with this teenage girl, which is really awkward, and the whole ice cream scene is weird. Not a fan of that in particular. Number 24, Session 7, Heavy Metal Queen. This is an ultimately harmless episode. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. I just don't think it is very interesting or captures the real feeling of the show very well. I think this episode is fortunate for being at number 7 because by the point someone's watched this far in, they're already likely invested, and they get a sense of what the show can do. So having a less energetic, less interesting episode 7 in isn't really going to hurt it, whereas if this had been the first episode of Cowboy Bebop, I really think people would have dropped off. The episode focuses on this character named VT, who's kind of a gender non-conforming tomboy character, who everyone is trying to guess what her name is, and then she just kind of gets wrapped up in a situation with the Bebop crew, but the antagonist of the episode, they're not really that memorable. In fact, for the pictures for this episode, I just wanted to show the people that she talks to, because on the plus side, I do like the visual storytelling, that each one of the truckers or crew members has their own style and their own kind of personality reflected in their various items. That's pretty cool to see. Just as an episode, I don't think it's much more than a dud. And now that we're at number 23, everything from this point on is good. I don't think there's any bad episodes left. 23 is really low on our ranking, but again, in a lesser show, this would be higher. It's just that the standards for Cowboy Bebop are so high. So for number 23 for me, it's Session 3 Honky Tonk Woman, which is the debut of Faye Valentine. As an episode, it's good. It structurally works. It does a good job showing who Faye is, her sense of danger, that she's someone who's bold and kind of has agency, but also lands herself in precarious positions. Her penchant for gambling is shown, thus her desperation for money. We get to see Jet in that cool-looking hat and shades. That's always nice. And the overall casino theme is really cool. It stands out. I just don't think this is an episode that is the strongest for Faye. I think there's ones where she shines more, and it feels rather run-of-the-mill and ordinary in terms of the plot and the tension. Number 22 is Session 19, Wild Horses. The centerpiece of this episode is who I'm just going to affectionately refer to as Sid from Final Fantasy VII. You've got this aged, kind of grisly figure of a pilot that has all these ambitions of repairing these old technology and setting them into the sky. And we know that Spike has a history with the man, although we don't know much about that. And for the most part, the episode just revolves around the two new characters of the old pilot mechanic and his young partner, associate, child surrogate, who's really into baseball on the radio. And it's kind of cool to see baseball on the radio still be a thing. As with a lot of Cowboy Bebop, you see a mixture of old tech and new tech. The highlight of the episode definitely is the rocket going off at the end, seeing familiar space technology from our time launching up in the sky to help save someone riding in the more futuristic tech. It's cool. Number 21, Session 10, Ganymede Elegy. This one's got a lot of highs and lows for me that kind of mellow it out. On the high note, it's good to see a Jet-centered episode. It's one of the first episodes really focusing on Jet that we get. That rhymed. And I do think it's really good. I think that we get a sense of kind of the regret and sort of solemn nature of Jet that we often don't see when he's with the Bebop crew. And a lot of this episode then focuses on his relationship with his former love interest and also the former love interest boyfriend who has a bounty on his head. The actual chase scene at the end where he's pursuing them is good. It's nice to see that Jet is willing to pursue his convictions, even if that means taking a personal stake in it, even if that means going against someone he deeply cared about. The problem is, I don't care about her. I don't end up feeling like I really understand her or know her. And unlike Julia, who is Spike's love interest, I don't get the sense that there's much more to her than what meets the eye. I don't even remember her name. She's a very bland stock character. And in terms of the way that Cowboy Bebop handles female characters, this one feels the least thought out, and as a result, the episode suffers. For an example of a side character done right, we have at the very end of the show, Edward meeting their father, and Edward's father is just like this really bubbly, super strong personality, and you don't really have a lot of time with him, but you get a sense that there's a lot to this guy, and he's fun, he's memorable. I don't get the sense with this particular love interest character for Jet, meaning it's ultimately pretty forgettable. Number 20 is Session 22, Cowboy Funk. Initially, I had this lower on my list, but then I realized I wasn't really being fair to it. It's a silly episode and it's a light episode, but those are good to have too. There's some of those episodes later that are very high on my list. The cowboy character is pretty fun and memorable, and I personally have a soft spot for the bomber, who every time, he wants to explain why he's doing it, he always gets cut off and stopped. That's a fun gag. I think it works every time it's done. It gets funnier as the show goes on. And I do think the mystery of the cowboy character is cool in a sort of like Teen Titans Red X kind of way. He's a foil to Spike, and that's interesting. Maybe they could have done more with the cowboy being a foil to Spike, maybe have a little bit more to it, but again, that would almost take itself too seriously at that point. Number 19, Session 8, Waltz for Venus. Aside from being a great session name, Waltz for Venus is a good name, we also do get to see more of Spike in this episode, as he takes under his wing sort of almost a disciple in this kind of gung-ho character, who's ultimately just trying to find a cure for his sister. The whole situation plays out like a pretty standard tragedy. If you know enough about media, I feel like, in storytelling in general, I feel like you're going to be able to catch on pretty quick where the story is going. It's fairly predictable beat by beat, which I think is why it isn't higher on my list for me. But it is still well done and well told. It's a simple story with good execution, and it contributes more of that tragedy that's in Cowboy Bebop, which I think that melancholy is important. And it's not just melancholy for the sake of like nihilism, it's in the sense of sacrifice to help another, to find meaning in another person, and that resonates with the show's themes pretty heavily later on. Number 18 on my list is the second part of Jupiter Jazz. You'll see the first part later on. I do think the second part is weaker. The best thing about part 2 is definitely going to be the ending, where we have Vicious's former comrade, dying in the ship, and Spike helps them get a kind of a farewell by sending them in a rocket off into space. You get a great musical moment at the ending. It kind of breaks the traditional ED format. But otherwise, this episode isn't really that special. We've had better episodes with Vicious before this point, and we've had more interesting episodes for Spike and for the characters involved. I also remember less about Faye in this episode, and a lot of why I liked Jupiter Jazz Part 1 was due to the involvement of Faye. So, we'll get there when we get there, but Part 2 is it's alright. It's kind of the aftermath. On a similar note, my number 17 pick is Session 25, The Real Folk Blues, Part 1. This is almost the inverse situation. I think Part 1 is weaker, and I guess it's pretty simple why. This is the episode that sets up Spike meeting Julia at the very end, but then the actual Julia content is in the second part. It shows Vicious fighting against the Syndicate, but the actual Vicious fight is in the second part. The situations with Spike versus Faye and Jet wanting him to stay around, they start here, but they really hit their mark in the second part. I don't think part 1 is especially memorable. If you remember the ending, you're going to think of what happens in the second part. And I think that that's okay. It's good setup. It's really good setup. If I was watching this when it initially aired and I had to wait a week in between episodes, I'd be definitely ready for the ending. But as it stands, it's just a good episode with good setup that isn't really able to have an identity of its own. That said, some great fight scenes and great space scenes, and some really beautiful shots. My number 16 spot near the middle of the list is Session 1, Asteroid Blues. I initially had the first episode much higher, until I kind of realized I was maybe being a bit exaggerative of how good it is. But that being said, episode 1 of Cowboy Bebop is very strong, and it almost needed to be, because you needed to have something to get people interested and energized. And I think this episode is a great introduction to Spike. We see the face that Spike puts on for other people. We see the sort of jovial, smiling, kind of joking character, a little bit of the Lupin mannerisms, but then he breaks into the fight sequences, and we see what he's truly capable of in combat. And there's also a few moments where we see the melancholy. We see his understanding of loneliness. You have the central antagonist here, someone who is, selling the red eye, but also seems to have an addiction to it himself, and uses it in combat. And you see his wife, who just desperately wants them to leave, to find a new home, to find a new start. And as the episode goes on, she realizes it's just never going to happen. And so she ends up shooting him as well as herself at the end. So you get the humor, you get the sadness, you get the seriousness, you get the action, and then you also get the first glimpse at the kind of the destitute nature of the Bebop, as they just keep eating bell peppers and mushrooms and not really having enough to subsist by. It sets up so much for the show, but does it so effortlessly, and that's really nice to see. I guess it's not higher because it is pretty simple, and it is basic. That's not bad. It's good. It's just there's episodes later that take it a little further. My number 15 pick is Session 23, Brain Scratch. This episode bears a lot in common with something like Serial Experiments Lane, or even like Nier Automata as far as games are concerned. And if you're interested in sort of that mystical technology perspective of the late 90s, going into the idea of, computers being used as almost a new religion, this certainly can scratch that itch. But I don't think it's really doing much more than that. And the thing with me I'm kind of torn about is I love that there's an episode in this show like this. I love that we get a glimpse into this sort of perspective. I love how Ein is actually useful in this episode. There's not nearly enough times in the show where Ein is used as a plot element. So seeing Ein, kind of crack the code is really cool. I think that it's an interesting and memorable sort of ethos of the episode. That being said, I'm also like, it's just a teaser. If I really wanted to go and explore these ideas and themes, I'd watch Serial Experiments Lane. I'd go watch Ghost in the Shell. I'd go watch The Matrix. There's other things that do a better job going deeper. This is a good 20-ish minute version of it, but it doesn't go nearly in depth as it could. And there are other episodes of Bebop that tackle their themes in more complex ways than this. So given how much it could have done, I can't put it super high, but I do love that it's here at all. But yeah, really, the highlight for me is just having Ein actually at center stage for once. And speaking of Ein, number 14 is Session 2, Stray Dog Strut. I think Ein's introduction is really good. It shows kind of the lighter, looser, more fun and wild side of Cowboy Bebop. as we get Spike chasing down this super dog at the same time as a criminal and a scientific research group, and it's all really fun and played for laughs. And you also get these scenes with an older lady who's running this pet store, and you can kind of see the exotic pet market going on in the future, and that's really cool to see. Very fun, entertaining romp that I think's really memorable to audiences, and especially following episode 1, it's another great episode to get the audience really sunk in and invested. Number 13 is Session 16, Black Dog Serenade. This is the best episode that focuses on Jet. And realistically, I could see myself bumping this up higher. Maybe I rated it a little low, admittedly. But this does so much for Jet as a character. We have Jet remembering and physically the show flashbacking in black and white, in a great noir style at that. How Jet used to work for the police force, and then he got in the accident that he believed was targeted against him by a criminal that ended up losing him his arm. You have this great introduction for the criminal, or at least what appears to be the main antagonistic character for this episode, as he coolly, dispatches almost one of his fellow criminals. When he notices him start to get a little bit wild and over the top, he just has a sort of cold, mechanical, menacing sort of undertone that he's able to just remove people who would otherwise be on his side. He doesn't bat an eye about killing as necessary. But then the facade kind of crumbles, and we see that the real villain of the episode was actually Jet's former partner. He was tasked with putting down the black dog because Jet was sniffing a little too close to the truth. Again, really strong Jet episode overall, and I could see it being moved higher up on my list if it wasn't for the fact that this show has so many good episodes. Number 12, Jupiter Jazz Part 1. I'm a sucker for snow levels in video games, and I'm also, I guess, a snucker? I guess I'm also a sucker for snow episodes in anime. So I really enjoy the snowy, kind of dreary vibes of the outside areas in the city. I really enjoy the warmth and sort of allure of the inside of the bar area. We have our new character introduced, who's the jazz musician, the jazzist, the jazz player, the musician person, and I forget their name. And I say they because the gender's a bit complex in this situation, but it is that complexity that I think adds a little bit more to the episode. In general, I think of this as almost a Faye episode more than anyone else, even though, yes, it is involving Vicious and Spike. But Faye is kind of in a vulnerable spot here where she goes a little too far out on the limb, and she puts herself a little too far at risk. And we see kind of the results of the situation that she's found herself in. Some interesting gender dynamics. It does a lot for Vicious as a character. Overall, Jupiter Jazz Part 1 is real good. Number 11, Session 9, Jamming with Edward. The debut episode of Edward. This is a very fun mix of zany Edward antics, as well as some serious themes of loneliness and isolation. We get this sort of HAL 9000-esque satellite as the antagonist, who's just burning holes into the land almost like crop circles, because he's trying to draw animal friends almost. And you see through Edward a character who's able to help the Bebop crew almost empathize with the satellite, and able to understand that loneliness and be able to almost befriend it in a certain sense. It's a great introduction to Edward. It's a great introduction to the kind of character we're going to be getting. Also, Edward in general is so valuable to the crew as a hacker and showing more the computer side of things. 9 episodes in, it was the right time to bring Edward in. And in general, I just really like the Edward episodes. Speaking of which, number 10, Session 14, the other Edward episode kind of back-to-back, is Bohemian Rhapsody. This is the one with the chess theme. I think there's so many pieces of media that use chess as a metaphor, but unlike, something like Death Note or like Kingdom Hearts, chess here is being used in a small way, right? Chess is being used as something for just this episode, as kind of the fun mental battle of this aging, senile, former Vendetta employee who in the past had wanted to get back at this company he worked for, but now is so old he forgot he's even doing that anymore. And Edward's kind of able to make his last moments fun by giving him an actual challenge. There's a sort of absurdity to this that I really like in the episode, where, Jet is having conversations with the CEO of this company, and everyone's so serious about this threat and tracking this guy down and blah, blah, blah. You have so many people going after this old man, but in the end, it's just an old man who doesn't even know what's going on, just enjoying his game of chess, and there's, haziness in the air as everyone's getting high over in the hull of the ship. It's a fun episode. It's a good episode. and it's a good time. Number 9 is Session 18, Speak Like a Child. All 4 of the pictures I used here are from the VHS tape at the end, because that is the reason why it is breaking my top 10. As an episode, it's generally not that memorable for me. I mean, the VHS collector guy was kind of funny in a certain way, but really the draw for me is the ending with the VHS tape. It's one of the most special moments in the entire series for me. I think that everything about how it was shot is fantastic. Stripping away the music for a while just to let the kind of airy audio filter in of the VHS tape from Faye's childhood, to see all these different, young versions of Faye sending a message to her future self. It's very interesting to watch even as an outsider, but the effect it would have on Faye is incredible and extraordinary. A sort of physical embodiment of the past she can never get back. And yes, even though Faye's actual situation is ridiculous and over the top, I mean, she was frozen for like 50 years. That's not a thing most people can relate to. But there is a sense we can relate to maybe that a lot of people, look back at their past and aren't really sure if they're that same person, if they can even get that back anymore. And sort of the sense in which the past is unobtainable anymore. That's something I've given a lot of thought about, and it's something that makes me appreciate Faye quite a bit. So yeah, overall, just because of the VHS section, this is high tier. If the rest of the episode could carry that momentum and carry that, it'd be great. But even just on its own, this one 5-minute section, that does it. That does it for me. Number 8, Session 4, Gateway Shuffle. If I was a betting man, I would say that this is probably higher on my list than most people would put on their list. I don't actually know what most people would rank the episodes. I'm guessing. I haven't looked at other people's rankings. This is all very much just my authentic opinion. I don't know if this is a hot take, but Gateway Shuffle's fun. I really enjoy the over-the-top comical villain, almost this sort of PETA gone insane in the future sort of feel. This animal rights eco-terrorist group that's going to turn everyone into monkeys. It's high stakes, it's entertaining. You've got the core 3 already all together. It's really the first episode where the core 3 are all together, because you get Spike and Jet in the first one, Ein joins in the second episode, Faye in the third. This is the first one where we see the group kind of together. Granted, you don't have Edward yet, but still each of the 3 kind of get to play off each other and really build their relationships. It's just a good time. It's fun. My number 7 pick is Session 24, Hard Luck Woman. This episode serves as both the resolution to Edward's story, as well as the kind of near resolution to Faye's story. With Edward, we get an accidental reuniting of Edward with their father, who just doesn't seem to really care about Edward, kind of just abandons the kid every moment, doesn't remember what gender even Edward is, doesn't actually take responsibility for the kid one iota. Which leaves Ed in kind of a tough position at the end of the episode to ultimately make a choice. Is Edward going to stay with the Bebop crew, who's basically like a family at this point, or is Edward going to chase after their father? It's kind of one of those like Robert Frost, 2 roads meet in the woods, road less traveled kind of thing, where you have this sense that neither choice is clearly right or wrong. There's drawbacks to each, but Ed can't choose both at the same time. Ed happened to run into their father this time, but who's to say that next time it's going to be so easy to track him down? So at this exact moment, Edward has to make a choice, and I think it's the only happy ending of the 4 main characters, because even if we don't know where the path leads, Edward is choosing this path voluntarily, with kind of determination. Ed gets to go with Ein, and we also get the sense that there's a chance that they can make it work. That no matter what the road ahead is, no matter how long or how challenging it is, Edward has a chance of finding belonging. Whereas Faye, by the end of this episode, really lost that chance. She starts to remember more of the things from her childhood. She ends up tracking down like a 60-year-old, 70-year-old woman who, was one of her classmates. But Faye leaves the conversation before she can learn too much. Faye is kind of caught between running after her childhood self and wanting to avoid the pain of the truth, and by the end, she just is kind of left with the sense that there's nowhere for her to go anymore. And then we have scenes where Chet and Spike are just eating all these eggs because they don't know how to express their emotions over Edward leaving, and all they can really do is just eat in silence. It's a very interesting episode. It's one that I really underestimated. I've seen this show like 4 times, and this one kind of hit me this recent viewing. I don't think this episode would have been very high in my list last time, and maybe next time it'll be even higher. Who knows? Number 6 for me is Session 5, Ballad of Fallen Angels. It's very much a precursor episode to where the show is going to go in its finale. It's the first episode we get where it really dives into Spike's backstory with Vicious and with Julia. And while we really don't learn a lot, we get a first glimpse of, what are they like as people, and why does it matter to Spike so much. The whole scene with Spike crashing out of the stained glass window is super good. You've got the incredibly dramatic church music underscoring the whole event. You've got these rapid flashbacks to situations we don't know the full context of, but have to start to piece together on our own. We have this sense of real danger for Spike as he plummets to what could be his second death. Or maybe multiple. I don't know how many lives, Spike has. He claims not to like cats, but he seems to have 9 lives himself. And, we get Vicious in a very iconic introduction episode. Overall, it's just very strong. It reminds me a lot of, in Revolutionary Girl Utsuna, I think it's episode 8, there's one where, with Saionji, that it very much parallels elements of the ending really early into the show. And I feel like this is pretty much doing the same thing for Cowboy Bebop. And like episode 8 of Utena, it does it very well. Number 5 is Session 11, Toys in the Attic. This is a sort of spoof on the Alien movie, the first one. You have a sort of horror environment, but also mixed with comedy, as this sort of fungus in the fridge starts taking out various members of the Bebop crew, until you've got Spike at the end, having to kick out the fridge out of the Bebop ship to launch the poison out there. And they're all just, dying and recovering, and it's high stakes, but it's also comical. And you've got the sense of each character gets a chance in the spotlight with their own, monologue, so you have a sense of more of the philosophy of each of the characters. It's doing a lot of legwork for various elements and pulling them all off. The action's good when it's there, the tension's good when it's there, the comedy's good when it's there, and so are the ideas when they're there. So all in all, really good episode, and really memorable in how it breaks the format. Another episode that I think others might rank lower is number 4 for me, which is Session 6, Sympathy for the Devil. I feel like a lot of people, this is going to be a middling episode that I just happen to click with more, and I'm okay with that. The most iconic part of the episode for me has to be when Spike throws the harmonica in the air and does the finger gun at it. It's just such a great moment in time, reminding me a lot of that legendary shot in 2001: A Space Odyssey with the bone in the ship. If you've seen 2001, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. But I also like, even just on another note, how well this episode subtly characterizes Spike. There's a scene early on in the bar where he's, probably passed out from his drinking or fell asleep or something, and he remembers receiving the cybernetic eye implant, the false eye that we really don't hear about in dialogue until the last episode of the show. And then it has, from that point on, a story about the boy with the harmonica who's enjoying a life with his family until, through no fault of his own, just tragedy strikes and now he's unable to die. And this is an interesting parallel for Spike, because Spike is someone who's died once and is ultimately throwing himself into suicide missions he might not come back from. And this is one of those suicide missions, I would argue, that there's a great chance he wouldn't have made it back from this, and he knew it. So for him to kill the boy and kind of put him out of his misery, again, I think it's true to the name of the episode, Sympathy for the Devil. I think Spike can understand that pain. It's not the happy-go-lucky Spike we're used to seeing. The fact that this comes right after episode 5, where we had Vicious, I think is pretty apt. It's a good episode. Really good episode. My number 3 pick, which easily could have been my number 2 or my number 1, is Session 17, Mushroom Samba. My top 3 are all really interlinked for me, and if you ask me on any given day, I'd probably switch them around, but I do really enjoy Mushroom Samba. It is an Ed episode with Ein, 2 characters who need more episodes, who need more showtime, and they're hilarious in it. It breaks the mold of the show so wonderfully. It's got this sort of blaxploitation energy, which is super unique. There's so many funny gags in it, too. Between all the characters getting high off the shrooms, you've got Spike scaling an impossible staircase with a talking frog. You've got Jet talking to his bonsai trees. You've got Ein hopping around hilariously. You've got Faye, I think, in the bathroom with an aquarium vibe going on. There's the guy who's carrying around the casket of his friend who died. And that's really funny. Ultimately the guy who's selling the mushrooms, just eating these hot dogs and just trying to live his own life. And it's great. It's a great episode that really isn't like anything else in the show. And those are the episodes that usually resonate with me the most, are the ones that just feel very unique. It is the best Edward episode, and it is the best Ein episode, and love it. My number 2 pick is Session 26, The Real Folk Blues Part 2. This episode stuck the landing so well. There are so many things this finale had to do right, such a narrow chance of success, and it pulled it off wonderfully. You've got the culmination of Spike's relationship with Julia and his rivalry with Vicious. And although I've never really connected to Julia as a character, I kind of at a point now where I don't think that really matters, that Julia's not important to the Bebop crew. She's not important to Faye or Jet, and we really wouldn't have any reason to care for her either. That's not the point. The point is that Spike cares about her. That Spike is a guy who barely cares about anything. He seems to throw everything away and throw his life away and treat everything like a joke at times, but he risks everything for Julia, and that shows a lot about him. And the same thing goes for Vicious. We don't know a lot about Vicious, but the fact that Spike is willing to fight him and even in the risk of death, I think says a lot about it, that Spike and Vicious kind of view each other as the only people who can really kill the other. I think in a lot of other animes, this would have been a main antagonist of the whole series, whereas Vicious, we've only really seen him a handful of times. We saw him in episode 5, and then in a 2-parter, and then in here, so 5 episodes total, and none of these times is he against the Bebop crew. There's never a moment where we see Vicious fighting Jet. So I think that that's really interesting that we kind of ended on Spike's story, but with Spike's story coming to an end, because no doubt Spike died here, right? We then have a situation where you're left with just Jet and Faye. Edward's already left the crew, and I really don't believe that Jet and Faye can hold it together. Faye is lost without a purpose, and she needs to go seek out a new self. And Jet, the mother and father of the crew, the cook and the caretaker, doesn't have anyone to take care of anymore. And I really love the way that both characters get a chance to kind of say their final goodbyes with Spike and handle it in such different ways. You know, with Jet kind of treating it like a normal conversation, having a good laugh, having a good time, when really he knows what's going on, and you can tell as much with his seriousness when he tries to convince Spike not to go. That Jet cares a lot more than he'll ever let on. Similarly, Faye can't really express her full length of emotions, but she, in her actions, shows her desperation for Spike not to go. He's the one person she kind of can connect to right now. If she loses Spike, she really doesn't have anyone. And the way she's firing the gun kind of toward him but not at him, there's a lot you can read into with it. It's an excellent finale. The ending itself, when he's on the stairs and the frame kind of scaling up into the sky with the music playing, it's the beautiful ending. And those final words, you're going to carry that weight. One of the best endings I've ever seen in anything, really. It's really good. Which, leaves you wondering, right, what is my number one pick? And maybe if you've been paying enough attention, you can see what I haven't included yet. This might be a weird out of the blue one, or maybe this is a popular fan favorite, but my number one Cowboy Bebop episode is Session 20, Pierrot le Fou. Apologies if I said the French wrong. It's so interesting visually. It's got this sort of like Batman the Animated Series, but R-rated sort of vibe, and it takes that art style farther than the original Batman even really could. In the antagonist here, who really is the central character, we get a depiction of someone who's gone through an incredible amount of suffering. The whole montage sequence where it shows him being tortured and experimented on is brutal and just really incredible. And then you see now the kind of carnage he can deliver, where he's defying the laws of gravity as some weird, like, Joker, Penguin-esque, like, madman who is degrading mentally with every single passing day. So you get this sense that Spike really killing him is almost an act of empathy, just like it was for Sympathy for the Devil with the kid playing the harmonica. It's almost an inversion of Ed. Edward's innocence is kind of the saving grace. It's what allows Edward to empathize with others, what allows Edward to have hope, and it's also what allows Edward to maybe have the best chance at a happy ending. Whereas Pierrot le Fou here, his childhood nature is actually crippling him and making him sadistic. There's this whole element of Jet saying that nothing can be more cruel than a child. There's something to that here, that, this embodiment of childhood innocence gone wrong is this horrifying menace that Spike has to put an end to, if not for other people, also for the thing itself. The suffering that's inside of this creature, always smiling, always laughing. And I say creature because I don't know if you can call this a person anymore. I don't know if you can call this a human after what they've been doing to it. So stylistically, this is one of those cases where style is substance, and that's a good thing. It's the episode I'm always going to think of most when it comes to Cowboy Bebop. Is it the most important, or most serious, or most impactful, or funniest? No, but it is the one that I keep coming back to, and it's the one that I really think is a masterclass. Really nothing you can change to make it better. It's, to me, the go-to example of how Cowboy Bebop was willing to just be whatever it wanted. 20 episodes in, it wasn't afraid to change its style drastically. And there's not a lot of anime that I think can do that. Outside of, like, situational comedies or, you know, your weird sort of parody shows, how many shows can flip their style so much and still work, and still do it almost so effortlessly? So yeah, that is my top 26 Cowboy Bebop episodes. I would love to hear what you personally think of this list, and which episodes, you know, are high on yours, which episodes don't you like. I'm also curious if any of these are hot takes or not. Again, I'm not really aware of the Cowboy Bebop discourse, so to speak. I don't know if I threw any hot takes in here or not. All I know is that these are my authentic opinions, and Cowboy Bebop, again, every time I watch this show, I get more out of it. There's a great chance that next time I watch it, I'm going to have drastically different opinions on these episodes. That's okay. I think it's incredible that, you know, so many of the episodes of this show are just stone cold classics. It's an anthology series, but also manages to have some overriding themes that, while in the background and rather subtly told, are very compelling and interesting. If you like this sort of content, I also did do some videos on Revolutionary Girl Utena, which is another anime from the same time period that might have an overlap with the fanbase. That is also on this channel. I ranked Utena characters, episodes, and also ships. And I did that relationship ranking video with my friend, the Unplugged Professor, who I have a channel with called Snake Eye Dreams. It's actually more of my main channel, I would say. And Snake Eye Dreams has currently a series analyzing Revolutionary Girl Utena. I do have plans for other anime-related ventures in the future. So if that all interests you, go ahead and check that out. Again, our main channel is Snake Eye Dreams. You can reach us via Twitter at Snake Eye Dreams 1. That's the numeral 1. And then you can also email at snakeeyedreams@gmail.com. If nothing else, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Until next time, see ya, Space Cowboy.